Welcome to Playful Podcast, your guide into the underground scene where we discover topics on kink and electronic music every week. Don't forget to subscribe to not miss out on our next episode. We're excited to be here today with porn performer and filmmaker and founder of production company 4 Chambers, Vex Ashley. In this conversation we speak about who she was when growing up, how her porn interest started, and what made her get into the business of it. We also dig deeper into the world of deep fake porn, which is basically AI porn with faces of celebrities. Besides that, we look into the future and talk about the next big thing within porn and much more. I am Amanda, and this is Playful Podcast. If you would like describe yourself with 3 words, what would they be?
When you, when I saw this question, I was like, oh, I don't know how to do this. I think it's even worse, British people. Terrible. I hate talking about myself. Any word that you use to describe yourself sounds like you're being too not self-deprecating enough. I think I would what I would like to be is I think I'm creative. I think I am really adaptable. And what can I have as the last one? I think I'd like to think that I'm personable or friendly or I really like people. I don't know if there's a word for that, but
yeah, and grounded, I feel.
Oh, well, that's nice. I'll take that.
Yeah, rooted.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Aware of the now. Because sometimes when you have conversations, you think there are some little bit outside of their mind.
Yeah.
It feels like you're very much inside your body somehow.
I mean, it's interesting because it's nice that you would say that because as much as I work with my body and it's something that I would really aim to be really connected to it. But I think one of the things that I've struggled hardest with, or that I'm in a constant process of trying to get to, is actually listening to my body rather than necessarily being in my brain all the time. I think that that's kind of what we were talking about before about being vulnerable, which is that, sometimes it's very easy in situations to ignore how you feel in yourself. And even though I work with sex and I work with my body, I think it's sometimes been easy for me to put really listening to myself, my physical self, to one side. And that's something that as I'm getting older, I'm no, I want to be in my body and I want to be able to experience something physically in a way that I can really connect with, rather than necessarily always being in your head.
Being aware of that, I guess, is something that shifts this whole thing also.
Yes. Yeah. And it's that thing of being I don't think anyone's perfect at it. And I think just even recognizing that you're doing it is really important. It's been vital for me in understanding my sexuality and trying to undo some of that stuff. I don't know if it was the same for you, but when I was younger, in my early 20s and stuff, it was I was having all of this sex that I it just kind of felt like I was performing a lot. And I think that is really helpful when you perform sex for a living, but it doesn't necessarily always translate to feeling, actually really deeply feeling good in yourself and in your body, feeling those sensations really deeply. And yeah, as I've got older, I've been no, I want to make sure I'm doing that.
Yeah, because I think in my perspective, that's also a huge USP within 4 Chambers, right?
Yeah, no,
the whole connection and the whole being in the moment and not skipping the intimacy or the connection part.
Yeah, I think with 4 Chambers, one of the things that we were really keen to do, or something that was really important to me, was that sex isn't necessarily just about what porn isn't just about what sex looks like. It's for me, what's more interesting is how does sex feel? And what I really want to do with the work that we do is how can you make porn that like feels like having sex, not just necessarily looks like watching people fuck. So, you know, the atmosphere and the build up and the intensity and the way that like connecting with someone feels is, you know, you don't necessarily always get that just from like, I think what sometimes I feel like a lot of more traditional porn misses is that it kind of gives you everything at once. So you're like, you get this kind of middle distance shot where you can see like the face, the genitals, the like.
It gives you something so you can come very quick.
Yes.
That's the.
Yes, it's like, yeah, it's just designed essentially to give you everything you want immediately, so you can kind of use it fast and then discard it. And I think that, you know, sometimes for me, the reason why sex feels or is interesting is that, you know, there's a build up. There's like oh, that's hot. I want to see more of that, but I can't see more of that right now. I have to kind of like allow it to build. So I think often the way that I try and make films is with that like yearning in mind, where it's like, oh, I want to see more, or I want to experience more, but I have to like wait. And that means it's maybe not necessarily like, you know, maybe it's not the porn that I would watch if I was like, oh, I just really want to jerk off really quickly and then go to bed. But it means that it's maybe doing something else, or it's kind of maybe exploring sex in a different way.
Yeah. Okay, but if we go back a little bit, who were you as a teenager or like in school?
I was a very kind of cheesy little cyber goth. I was really invested in being really weird from like a young age. So I was kind of brought up in not necessarily the countryside, but like relatively rural area where there wasn't many people who were like little freaks like me. And I had, you know, spent a lot of time on internet forums. Like one of them was, this is like probably going to show my age, but it's called like vampirefreaks.com. It was so long ago. I don't know if you remember this, but it was kind of pre-MySpace, pre-Facebook, pre all of these things. It was like
we had the Swedish version of this.
Really?
Yeah.
It's so weird because like I still today know some people that I met through that site when I was like 14, 15. But yeah, I like shaved my eyebrows off. I'd like was, you know, I was in school and you know, I wasn't really allowed to have piercings or like weird hair or anything. But I'd got my septum pierced and like hidden it inside my nose, and I'd like shaved these chunks out of the side of my head, but I like kept my hair down over the top of them at all times to try.
So when you got home,
yeah,
you were one
like,
person, and
yeah, and like
person, but
yeah,
when it comes to the looks, at least.
Yeah, it was like I think I felt really like free to be able to. You know, I'm really lucky. Like my parents have kind of always like let me explore with that kind of stuff in a way, like whatever way feels good for me. And so, yeah, I looked, you know, I used to like draw my eyebrows on all the way up into this like shaved bit up here.
That's cool.
And it's really weird because now, weirdly, like the big platform shoes, the like kind of early 2000s goth stuff, it's totally fashionable now. So I see people wearing the shoes that people used to like throw mud at me for wearing when I was a teenager, and I'm like, wow, it's weird, this stuff comes back around, I guess.
Yeah, I would love seeing a photo of from this.
Oh, I have loads of photos. I love
you
like
should put them up.
I think sometimes people ask me, and I always like I try and find a new one every time, so I'm gonna make a little like Instagram highlight of all of my like tragic goth years. But no, I'm really proud of it. I think it was really formative for me. I don't trust anyone that wasn't a little bit of a weirdo as a teenager. Like I think it's really important to go through a stage where you experiment, and I definitely got to do a lot of that, and I think it definitely, you know, informed my ability to kind of do something a little bit. Finding
what you wanted.
Yeah.
That takes a lifetime for people to find something they're passionate about.
Yeah, I think it's like, I think sometimes there's this idea that, you know, there's just one thing that you need to search for a bit. Like when people say, oh, there's like one person who's your soulmate, or like you've got your one true calling in life. Whereas for me, like I think, yeah, just feeling like something that you connect with or that you think is interesting, whatever that is, and being able to run with it is, you know, better than just necessarily thinking that like, okay, I need to find the thing that defines me. You know, I was going to, when I finished like uni, I was going to go and be a teacher. So it's one of those things where I was like, I could have quite easily maybe gone down that path in life as well at some point, and I would be almost like a totally different person, I guess. But
and maybe not completely satisfied either.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think that like one of the things that I love about what I get to do now is that like I think I would really struggle like not feeling like I was able to do something that involved like making something. And like and like thinking about things really deeply is really important to me. So I think that, you know, I love people and I would, you know, I think being like teaching would be something that I would really enjoy. But yeah, just not getting to create is probably something that I would miss.
A teacher who does porn on the weekends.
Yeah, I think this is the problem where I've kind of ruined my possibility of ever going to be a teacher anymore. I'm like,
or
yeah,
the times will change. Who knows?
And maybe, yeah, we hope so. Doesn't feel like it's going that way right now, but you never know.
Maybe very, very, very slowly.
Yeah.
No, let's see. But you also come from a more left-wing family.
Yeah.
How did you speak about sex work within the family, or what was the view?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky. Like my parents are like, you know, very supportive. My mum and dad are probably from like a generation of, you know, my mum specifically probably came from a generation of people who were thinking about porn and women and feminism in a totally different context to maybe we think about it now. You know, it was kind of the era of people burning their bras and talking about like porn as violence against women. So it's not something, I don't necessarily think it's something that my mum would have picked out for me. But you know, the nice thing is that I feel like I have always got to do what I do kind of on my own terms, which I think is something that like my family really respect. And even if there's, you know, it's been like a process of like learning for everyone, I'm really lucky in that just like I think that they've always really like trusted that, you know, the decision that I make is the right decision for me.
That's very unique, I feel.
I'm really lucky. Like I know very few people who are able to be as just like upfront and kind of like, yeah, just kind of accepted.
Unlimited,
yeah.
Like, yeah, in their own choices.
Yeah, I don't think me doing porn or any stuff to do with sex was like a huge shock for them. In the, you know, it was...
They're like this little teenager who's masturbating in her room all the time.
Yeah, yeah, probably. And just like, I think also just like they knew I was always interested in maybe doing things that other people weren't prepared to do, or like, you know, going to the weird thing, going to the thing that's outside of the box. Like, you know, that was something that I think as a teenager I definitely like, you know, ran towards. So the idea that I would also end up doing something a little bit strange like in my adulthood, it wasn't a huge shock, I don't think. But like, yeah, I'm really lucky, and like I think it's I feel it like genuinely sad for people who aren't able to have like the support of not even just parents, you know, because we're all adults here. It's like whether or not my mom likes what I do isn't, you know, the end of the world. But, you know, it's that thing about just having like a supportive community of people around that you can share about sex work is something that I think a lot of people are missing out on. And yeah, I feel very lucky to have that.
Yeah, how did you... I think it was like for many people the internet and Tumblr and all these things
Yep.
triggers it. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but that makes you more curious and feel like you found something that is like tickling. And you can't stop tickle.
Yes, this is true.
But how did it start? Like, how was it the first time? Because I guess you started to perform before you created... No, but actually I know that you also created some like you were in art school, so you created some art with your naked body also. So maybe, yeah, you tell me.
Yeah. I mean, so I was at uni, I was studying art. I was, you know, for a number of years, like I'd been interested in like using my body, and I loved like, you know, feminist artists from the 70s who were like Helen Chadwick and Carolee Schneemann, people who were like using sex and eroticism and like nudity in their work in a way that felt like it was kind of exploring, you know, the artwork was intrinsic to the body, which I think is really something that I loved, and I made some work that was like that. But then, you know, I was working like a minimum wage retail job. I was exploring, you know, doing bits of this kind of very softcore modeling online, a bit like Suicide Girls-esque. But through that, I'd met this kind of community of other people who were doing porn, but doing porn on their own terms. And I think I'd always presumed that to be involved in sex or sex work, you had to be a certain type of person. So maybe you had, in my mind, I had this like idea of, you know, the traditional like porn performer, that when you don't know anything about porn, you're like, okay, you've got to have big tits, you've got to be like blonde, you've got to look like a 90s kind of porn star with a fake tan, and that wasn't really me.
And you cannot be in your body.
Yeah, well, yeah, just like I think it was just like there was a specific look that I felt like you had to adhere to, and that wasn't something I was interested in. But through this site, I met so many people who were doing it, but kind of doing it on their own terms, independently, and seemingly like doing well. And I was just kind of fascinated by it, you know, either both kind of conceptually, but also from the point of view of like, you know, oh, maybe this is something that I could make a bit of money doing. So I started webcamming, and was making, you know, more in like doing a couple of hours work a week than I was like working like a full day at this job in a shop that I had. So I started to take the money from that and think like, I think what I was seeing a lot of was, I was seeing a lot of porn, but I wasn't necessarily seeing a lot of porn that explored the potential of porn as a creative medium. So there was a lot of porn out there that was like a functional product, but not a lot that really felt like porn could be expanded to talk about other things. You know, could porn be treated as, you know, an aesthetic or a visual medium? Like, could it and it wasn't that wasn't out there, it's just necessarily not what I was being exposed to.
Yeah, it's more hidden, it's like subcultures, right?
Yeah, and just like, I think because so much of the porn that we watch is fed to us through like a tube site algorithm, so it's just often people are not really going much further than the first page of the tube site to find something. And the problem is, I think sometimes that kind of limits us into just watching things that are maybe quite samey or quite safe or quite, you know, heteronormative or quite kind of like, yeah, not really expanding our idea of like what sex could be. The thing is, the problem with what happened with porn was that people used to pay for it, and then what happened was the tube sites came in and they totally decimated that market, which basically meant that people were used to getting it for free. So the people who were making porn had to preserve what little cash they were still getting out of it, which meant that they could only make and fund work that they were like, well, we're guaranteed that lots of people are going to try and buy this. And the only people that were imagined to be paying for porn were, you know, your like traditional porn consumer, your, you know, middle-aged guy sat at home in his room and like, you know, maybe he wants to see a certain thing, and maybe so they were like, we need to make porn for him because he's the only one left that's paying for this. So that's kind of how it felt like it became more limited. Or it's not, I think maybe it's just always been, we have only ever presumed that that's the type of person that will pay for porn, so that's the only kind of porn that was funded. But what's interesting about the market now is that with sites like OnlyFans and, you know, other kind of clip sites that basically mean that you can buy content direct from performers, it means that performers actually get to make the work that they want to make, and then if it sells, they can take more risks, they can experiment, they can do things that they're interested in, and they can be a bit more free to kind of go outside of that box, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. There's also like we were meeting with this woman a week ago or some weeks ago, and who was a dominatrix who was into, or her niche was dental fetish. So she came from she was like a dental nurse, or what do you say?
Yeah, dental nurse. Yeah, that's what we'd say.
Yeah. And so she had like the proper chair, and she knew how to do fillings and all these things. And that was like, so her customers were people who maybe got their first boners in the chair, or who were like feeling triggered by an emotion, or were like, I'm gonna overcome these scares in this sexual environment or whatever. And that's also something that comes, like, I'm amazed if you open up the doors to sex being a part of society, or, you know, then people can be allowed to be creative within that field, and to like explore their things, and I mean how the world can thrive.
I think that one of the things that, you know, is such a huge takeaway from me doing this kind of work is that like human sexuality is so much more complicated and expansive and interesting than, you know, we've even begin to kind of touch on. Like there's so much potential, and I think often that potential is not really being realized because it's limited by like censorship or, you know, shame. So getting to work with some of that has been really interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we have been speaking about like mainstream porn. I am not like the person who's against mainstream porn.
Yeah, no, me either.
No. And like I know like actresses and actors who are doing it completely enjoy, you know, and there are so many people who enjoy this kind, like, you know, having sex in various ways, so it's no shame at all. I just had to highlight that.
No, I think like one of the things that I think is interesting is sometimes it gets divided into like, oh, you've got like bad porn and good porn, but for me it's like what we just need is like a greater diversity of the kind of sex that you can see. So the sex that we currently get to see, that totally should exist, and that's like an important part of sexuality. But it just means that like that shouldn't be the only kind of thing that you can see. You should also be able to see people fucking in and exploring like their sexuality in a number of different ways. And at the moment we're kind of quite narrow in the band of stuff that you know that we get to look at. But it definitely doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that necessarily. It's because, you know, what people enjoy is subjective.
Yeah. Exactly, but if all sex you see is without foreplay or intimacy, then you maybe assume that that's how sex should be. Yeah. But if you see some quick fucks and then some that are like slow, then you're like, oh wow, sex can be so many things.
Yeah,
like,
I think porn gets a really bad rap for, you know, being like harmful to your sexuality and stuff, but it never really gets celebrated for all of the ways in which we expand our idea about sex through watching like porn and media and stuff created for that. I think sometimes it's just demonized, which it means I kind of don't think it's useful to be like, oh, porn is good or porn is bad. It's just like porn is kind of neutral.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you can learn and take some things that are really positive from it, and there are things about it that can be complicated and can be difficult and can be like not so nice, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have to pass like a blanket judgment about everything, because, you know, it's a lot more complicated than that, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And with putting a blanket, you miss out on so much.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, you also miss out on what is actually bad within it. Like, you don't get to see. But I am actually curious to know, like, when you performed for the first time, what was some things that you discovered within yourself? Like, and how was it to enter the first set?
So it happened less like there was one particular time, and it was more that it was kind of like a slow, gradual rolling back. So, you know, I was already camming and I was performing like live webcam shows with people, you know, before that. And then there was maybe a point where for the first time I was meeting somebody for the first time and like fucking them. And it was the first time that, you know, the person there was like a camera that was right there filming us. We'd traveled to San Francisco, and I was, you know, Tumblr friends with somebody called Owen Gray, which if you like watch porn, Owen has just exploded recently. Like, he's almost like a mythological like porn figure within like when women talk about watching porn. But this was, you know, years before that. He was just shooting some stuff for sites like kink.com. And we'd been talking for a while about maybe doing something. And we were in San Francisco and we just went for like brunch. And then we went back to his house and yeah, shot the scene. And I was obviously really nervous beforehand, like no idea whether or not it was going to be something that was, you know, that I could do or that was good. And honestly, it was so easy. It was so much more easy to like, sometimes I find this, it's like so much more easy to like fuck someone than it is to make like polite small talk with somebody that you've just met. But yeah, it went really quickly. It felt like, you know, I felt amazing afterwards because I was like, holy fuck, like I've done it. And it felt very much like, yeah, that it was really connected, that it's not that I forgot that the camera was there, but it felt very much like it was something that I really loved the performance of it. And I think that that's something that I still get a takeaway from today, which is like, sometimes when you shoot a scene with somebody, it's like afterwards, all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I've really relaxed into that. And I'm like feeling really good. You feel really connected to that person because you've both done this like very vulnerable, weird thing together. And afterwards it's like, oh, instant like friends basically, because, you know, it really like, it's an amazing energy that you get after a shoot that's gone really well.
Yeah. I mean, this was, I don't know how many years ago, but since then your journey has been crazy. I just told you that I am so impressed with what you created. Like, it's just immense. So for chamber, you say it differently with your British accent. Chambers.
Yeah. You can say chambers. I like it. It sounds more like chic.
Okay. Are celebrating 10 years.
Yeah. So this year we worked it out that it's like, fuck, I think it's like 10 years this year. And it doesn't mean that it's like 10 years of us working exactly like this, but basically when I look back at it, you know, deciding that this project that we were doing, we were going to call it Four Chambers. It was, 10 years this year. And, you know, really it's also been like 10 years of me not having a proper job, you know, 10 years of me like, you know, doing this thing that like, you know, everyone says, oh, you know, you couldn't make like, you can't make money out of porn, or you can't, you know, you can't do anything interesting with porn. And it's so amazing to like prove people wrong.
Because I also heard what you said, having a proper job, and it kind of infuriates me a little bit that this is the view on what you do. Like, I've also heard this from people who I know who are like, oh, aren't you getting a reel? And I mean, that triggers me a lot. It's like diminishing what you're actually doing.
Yeah.
I never put this much emotion into anything that I've been working full time with, that I do with Playful, for example.
Yeah, of course.
So like, I don't know, but
I think everyone, the problem with porn is, there's this idea that what you're doing is just selling a fantasy, and the fantasy is that, you know, the sex just happens organically, you know, it's very easy, it feels very connected, and you don't want to look behind the scenes to see all of the like work and the preparation and the communication that goes on behind that. So I think it's almost, yeah, we're kind of invested in the idea of making it look easy, but yeah, it's similarly, I'm the same where, like, you know, I really put my heart and soul into this, and I think that that's what still makes it feel interesting, like 10 years later, is because you get to feel like you're doing something that I really give a shit about, basically.
Yeah. Was there a moment where you felt like, fuck, I made it?
I mean, no, but I was just saying that, like, yeah, I think especially in certain spaces that maybe when I first started out, I would feel a little bit kind of like a bit of an imposter in. It's actually really nice now to be like, oh, I remember being here when, you know, maybe like at the beginning, and looking at people who were where I am now and going, wow, I hope I can be like them someday. And then I'm like, oh, maybe I am that person. And that's really nice, because you just get to a point where you're like, okay, yeah, I think I got this.
One thing I think is interesting now is that, you know, that the AI thing that's going on, people were a couple of months ago sharing the portraits of like illustrated. I thought they looked terrible. I was like, why are people so obsessed with this? But whatever. It was also something that artists started to speak about, like, oh, this is a threat towards our art and our job and income and everything. And this is something that also, like, the AI is also coming into the porn biz. Yeah. Which is interesting. And there's this deep fake porn that is like, basically you can put famous people's faces on actors, so it looks like you're having sex with, for example, or it looks like not you are having sex, you are watching.
It could be.
Maybe if you have AI, no, you have VR. The VR glasses, maybe that's probably the next step also, like, ooh, tonight I'm gonna have sex with Kim Kardashian. Yeah, exactly. You know, probably it's gonna happen. But I mean, it looks like you're watching a porno created, or like with actors who are like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie or whoever. Yeah. What's your view on all of this?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think it was maybe always going to go this way, but it's interesting to kind of see the beginning of that technology and thinking about, like, wow, you know, the potential for this is wild, not just in porn, but just in general. You know, it almost, there's this idea up until that point that anything you've put on video that looks real is real, but now it's almost questioning how much we can believe what we see on film, in the same way that now with photos we think, oh, that could be photoshopped, where we're going to get to the point with video where it's like, well, who knows if this is what actually happened or not. The porn thing is complicated. I think it's obviously, you know, the deep fake stuff is very, very difficult. I think, like, you know, obviously having your image used in a way that you didn't consent to is invasive. Having your image used for sex, like, we can't pretend that sex, you know, your sex is just like any other, you know, any other media that you might create with your image. So it's obviously like very distressing for the people whose faces are being used. But I think often the porn performers who are in that video also don't really get thought of as that being kind of something that would be horrible for them, because essentially their faces are being erased where someone else's face is kind of being put on top of it. And I think that, you know, the idea that, you know, your body is just a vessel for somebody else's fantasy is something that you have to kind of grapple with a lot. And I think it's dehumanizing for both people. I think that the AI porn thing is interesting, because I think there's this idea that, you know, people were sharing these images and they were saying, oh, you know, essentially, it's over for OnlyFans girls because, you know, we can make a hot girl in a bikini computer generated.
So stupid.
And you go, what that does is that entirely misses the point of why people want to watch porn and why people buy porn, which is that I think that people want to connect with the performer as more than just an image. Like you can put hot girl in a bikini into Google and come up with, you know, maybe thousands of results anyway. But what you want to see a very specific hot girl in a bikini, and you want to see that person because you're like, I've seen what they've done. I've always thought they were hot. I've followed them for a while.
Maybe I know their personality.
Yeah.
And I feel, you know, that the personality is such a big thing.
It really is. And like OnlyFans has only exacerbated that, where there's so much in that it feels really important that it feels like a connection with a person rather than just an image. So I think that for now anyway, AI is not going to change that. But I think it would be stupid to say that, you know, it never could do that, you know, because we already see that the AI can like generate conversation. So who knows, maybe in 20 years time we'll all be like jerking off to like chat bots.
We have now come to the part of the podcast where if you're a Patreon, you'll get to listen to the extra material where Vex Ashley shares her thoughts on what she needed to fight through to be able to do what she does today. We also look into the future of how porn will be seen in 50 years from now and get a bit philosophical. This and much more you can hear on our Patreon page. Go to patreon.com/playfulmagazine. I think we're on this topic a bit, but in a different way. But you know, like when you create something, there's always room to leave some stuff for the imagination. And how important is that when in your creations?
Yeah, I think,
or like how do you work with it?
For me, like I think that sometimes when people watch porn, they can be quite limited to only searching for the thing that they think they want to see. So, you know, when you go to a PornTube site, you maybe put in the 3 keywords that you normally type in to find the kind of content that you think you want, which is all well and good. But I think that sometimes what that misses is the idea that you're maybe going to watch something that you are going to have to go in curious about, that you maybe don't know exactly what you're going to see, what to expect. And that means that maybe you get to see a kind of sex that you wouldn't normally search for, or a kind of person that maybe didn't necessarily fit the imagined ideal of what you might find attractive. I think that for Chambers, we don't use like keywords or labels or markers like that for our films or our performers. And I think that hopefully that leaves space for performers and the films to just exist on their own terms, which means that when you're viewing them, you can kind of be a little more curious and be a little bit more open-minded and kind of, exist in a space where you're like, I don't know what I'm going to see, but I'm excited to find out, which I think is maybe missing.
How much do you like in the films let the actors do their do their own things and like influence the film?
We try really hard, or like as if I'm performing, or I will, we'll have a conversation with the performers about like what are they down to do today, you know, how are they feeling, what's interesting for them. We'll kind of give them the general idea of the film. So we're like, okay, let's say we're making a film about this, like it's going to look like this is the kind of concept for it, and we try and give the performers as much freedom to basically interact within that concept sexually in a way that feels good for them at the time. So we don't really direct the sex. We don't say, okay, and now can you fuck like this and then turn over and then we'll do a bit like this. We kind of generally like give them the concept, but give them the freedom to interpret it how feels good for them at the time. Because I think for me, if you're too prescriptive with the sex that you are filming, it takes some of the spontaneity out of it, or the magic a little bit. If people want a bit more direction, I'm happy to try and give them that. But for the most part, I think it's always worked better for us to work in collaboration with the performers rather than.
All right, this is a little future. Like, let's look at the future. We just spoke about the AI porn, but what do you think will be the next big thing in porn?
What's interesting is like it's even changed in the time that I've been doing it, which is that people always used to say, oh, porn is, you know, just that kind of POV, gonzo, really intense kind of rough sex porn. But I almost think that's been out of fashion now for like maybe a couple of years. And the stuff that I feel like we're seeing way more of is actually stuff that's kind of, it's really narrative driven. It's all about like acting and stories and the context of why people are fucking. And
stories of why people are fucking, that got me.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
That's a big one, yeah.
Because for me, it's, you're like, I need enough about like why the sex is happening to make me interested in the sex. Because it's like, well, you know, fucking is fucking at the end of the day. And I think that for some reason, for whatever reason at the moment, the fashion is a little bit more like, yeah, to do with stories. I'm seeing a lot of porn with maybe a bigger budget, a higher production value. And yeah, a lot more, feels a lot more like people are trying to maybe make like more like films, which is something that I think is really fascinating. And I think maybe that will also continue to kind of go in that way. But then on the other side, I really think that actually what people are really craving is with all of this like AI stuff, with filters on everything, with you know, everything online feels so constructed and so realized that actually I think what people are really craving in sex and in porn is just a sense of like uncuratedness, just authenticity, just they want to see. I mean, for me, this is also what I like. So I actually really like just something shot on somebody's phone camera. I want it to be badly lit and grainy. I want it to feel like it's just two people that have just grabbed a phone and that are just filming whatever's happening now. And I think that as a pushback to how kind of filtered and polished everything is, some like sex that feels really raw and feels really unfiltered, I think is going to become more common or more looked for.
Yeah. We want to be surprised.
Yeah.
A little bit. Like, if you see something that is similar for too long, it just, like, it maybe doesn't do it for you anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched way too much porn to enjoy porn anymore, unfortunately, but...
Do you feel that you can't be surprised?
I definitely think I could be surprised, but I think that for the most part, it's more that it's just become a bit of a humdrum regular part of my life, that it doesn't have that, like, it doesn't feel like a special treat anymore. It feels like you know, I wake up, I scroll my Twitter feed and I'm like, oh, so much porn.
Porn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Twitter is porn heaven. Short clips.
Yeah.
Like Reddit.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's maybe what we're talking about with the like authenticity of stuff, where it's like people, I think less and less want huge long movies, and people are consuming content in all areas of the world, like including like, in all parts of the internet, like TikTok, and like media is becoming shorter and shorter and more like instant and impactful all the time. And porn's definitely going that way as well.
Yes. Our brains will explode.
Yes. It's definitely not the kind of thing, I'm definitely not going to try and like catch up with that. I think like what I do is better in the like, yeah, I don't want to just make like little TikTok reels.
But this is so interesting. This is also what you were seeing for the future. How do we get to those situations? The background stories that you were like, and this is something like, you know, the more, or like, this is a very basic analytic from me that maybe is too basic, but whatever, that like you can see the race of the mindfulness, and you see the race of the, at the same time, the higher speed content. So I feel that what you're onto, the story driven things and the background and the leading up to the story leading up to, it's maybe the mindfulness era.
Yeah, I think you have to have it when the world becomes so chaotic. You also have to really try and hold on to something that feels like a bit more grounding. But yeah, I think there was a couple of years ago a porn filmmaker from Australia called Gala Vanting who coined this term like slow porn, which is like, something that feels like it's a direct kind of in direct conversation with all of that really intense kind of instantaneous instant gratification stuff, and I think that like we definitely need a bit of both.
Yeah, that's hot. Yeah, you need both to feel that both of them are hot. Yeah. Now that we are speaking about the 10-year anniversary and going back in time and such, what do you feel that you learned about yourself over these years?
I mean, so much, it's like the whole of my 20s basically. But yeah, I think that one of the things that porn has really given me is an appreciation for my body and what my body can do and the ways in which I can use my body as a tool. I think it's also given me a really expanded idea of not only my own sexuality, but also the potential of sexuality and how diverse and how interesting and how it really is so much more than just this like very narrow idea of what sex should be that we're kind of fed by society. It's really expanded how I think about it. And it's also just like really given me an insight into like it really doesn't matter like how well you fit society's ideal of what is someone who is hot or sexy. Like people look at so beautiful and hot fucking like getting to see people in that state, getting to connect with people in that state, it's like everybody looks hot while they're having an orgasm. And I think like the kind of porn people want to see and the kind of sex that people want to see is so much more than maybe what we're just fed.
Yeah. Nailed it. Thank you so much.
Of course, no worries.
For sharing your brain in this way. It's a blessing for us.
Thank you.
This was it for Playful Podcast this week, but please follow, subscribe, and listen to our next episode. And if you want to have a say about future artists or even ask your own question to one of our guests, follow us on Instagram and make sure to add your question when we lift our coming guests. Thank you so much for joining and see you next week.